Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Adelman. This is another edition of Questions for Lawyers. I am so excited about this episode. My dear friend, Douglas J. Rudman, is with us today, who's a phenomenal criminal defense attorney. We were supposed to do this show at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, but Mr. Rudman is being called to trial in Broward County. Doug, thanks so much for accommodating us so that we could still do the show this week.
Oh, Jeff, thanks so much for having me. It's a really, really, really big honor for me to be on a program such as this.
Well, I guess thank you, but if you could, because I deal with this too, where you really don't know if you're going to trial or not, a lot of times to the last minute. Can you tell people what that's like?
Well, in order to really tell people what going to trial is like, we kind of have to look at the overall differences between criminal offenses and civil offenses. Jeff, I know that you're a personal injury lawyer, you're a civil lawyer, and when you guys file a case and you go to trial, you're fighting over money.
Right.
Well, when we go to trial, we're really fighting over someone's liberty. So when we go to trial, it is significantly different than when you go to trial. And I mean no disrespect when I say that. It's just two sides of the same coin. And when we go to trial, it's usually after 6 to 9 months of us going back and forth and looking at the allegations of what the state has and really trying to determine if the state has enough to be able to prove my client guilty beyond and to the exclusion of any and all reasonable doubt. But it's so important throughout the entire process that you maintain the posture of, hey, we're going to take this case to trial, because
Right.
there's a great amount of lawyers out there, and I'm sure just like in your practice, who wake up one day and they say, I want to be a criminal defense attorney, or I want to be a personal injury attorney. And what do? They hang out their shingle, and that's what they do. And believe it or not, there are so many lawyers out there that they walk into the first court hearing and they tell the state, what kind of a plea offer do you have for me? Well, Jeff, what incentive does the government even have to look at their case if they know you're there to accept a plea right from the very beginning?
Exactly.
Much like you have to contend with those attorneys that walk in and they're just looking for a settlement, yet there's no incentive for them to look at the big picture and how much money it could really cost them. It's because we take that posture throughout the entire proceeding that they really come to the table with the best of what they can offer.
And getting back to exactly what you're talking about with what I do with civil law, we're dealing with money. There's no emergencies with civil law, but somebody going to jail when they shouldn't be going to jail, that's a pretty big deal. I mean, that's everything.
Well, and that's really one of the reasons why my firm has really made an app for people to download on their phone, and it's proprietary software that actually has a panic button built into it. So if you are on the side of the road in the middle of the night, you can hit that button. It blows up everyone in the firm, and we're ready, willing, and able to jump in and take immediate action. I have to tell you, Jeff, in my business, there's really two types of lawyers. Those lawyers that are proactive and the lawyers that are reactive. It's the proactive attorneys that get involved early and tend to get the best results for their client. It's the reactive ones that sit there and wait for bad stuff to happen and then try to gobble up that business afterwards. And that's the benefit of having a proactive attorney is we get involved early. And early intervention, is a lot like a medical treatment. With early intervention, we could really deliver the best results possible.
Tell everybody what type of matters you represent people in. I mean, I know some people do DUI, some people do misdemeanors. Can you kind of just run us through the gamut of what type of criminal matters you defend people for?
It's so funny you ask such an easy question, but it has such a complicated answer. One of the things you talked about DUIs and you talked about criminal law. Well, one of the things I tell you is every every DUI attorney is also a criminal law attorney, but not every criminal law attorney is also a DUI attorney. DUI is such a small little secular form of defense work because it's so complicated, because there are so many things involved with that. Criminal defense is even more significantly different because, just to give you an example, I just got done meeting with a white collar allegation where someone's alleged to have stolen over $65,000. And then the next conversation I can have is on Wednesday, I'm going to trial in a case where someone is alleged to have cocaine and thrown it out of their car when the police were trying to pull them over. I'm going to trial tomorrow on a DUI allegation where we have someone who on their birthday was driving in Fort Lauderdale, and they claimed that her mirror hit the mirror of a bus that was parked on the side of the road. The fact is there's no simple allegations that we deal with. There's no simple way to discuss it. The best way to describe it is look, if the police are talking to you for some reason, don't say anything without talking to me first, because at the end of the day, 9 times out of 10, the police know a lot more than you think they know when they come and talk to you. And I'd rather you just keep your mouth shut and let me do the talking for you, because anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Anything I say is just being done under the guise of being a zealous advocate.
I hear you. We're going to ask this again, but could you please tell everybody your phone number and your website address?
Well, my phone number is 561-444-4000, or you could call our 1-800 number, which is 1-800-8-4-NOT-GUILTY.
8-4-NOT-GUILTY. I like it.
8-4-NOT-GUILTY. My web address is www.flatriallaw.com, www.flatriallaw.com.
Well, I'll make sure to post that after the broadcast is over. Let me ask you something, Doug. With regards to a DUI, we hear a lot of things, what you should do, what you shouldn't do, if by chance you're pulled over and there's a chance that you're going to be going over the limit if you use the breathalyzer. What's the best advice that you would give somebody if they suspect they may be over the limit?
Well, the best advice I could give, Jeff, and I know that at being responsible attorneys, the best advice we could always give is don't drink and drive, okay? That's the best advice we can give to begin with. But
unfortunately, that's not the world we live in. People are going to do that. Sometimes good people make bad decisions, and it's a first-time offense. What would you tell that person?
Well, the first thing that I'm going to tell them is listen, let's say you find yourself on the side of the road. The less you say, the better. From the minute the officer walks up to your car, he's already making observations about you and trying to make decisions as to whether or not he believes you're under the influence of alcohol. Believe it or not, having done ride-alongs myself and as a former prosecutor, I can tell you that the smell of alcohol that comes off someone is prolific. If someone's been drinking, you may not realize it yourself, but you're giving off odors. It's kind of like you smelled last Saturday night when I ran into you, Jeff. Do you remember that?
I was hoping you weren't going to bring that up, but whatever. You know.
But it's prolific.
We're very open on questions for lawyers. So.
And even when they tell you or ask you for your license and registration, they're judging on the method in which you take out your license, you take out your registration, you start looking for stuff in your car. So what I would tell you is look, keep in mind that the police are judging you from the minute that they walk up. Less is always more. The less you say, the better it is. I always tell people I'd rather them leaving thinking you're guilty of DUI instead of you giving the evidence they need to know you're guilty of DUI. If they ask you to perform those field sobriety exercises, if they ask you to get out of the car first, you do have to get out of the car. But even when you get out of the car, they're judging you on whether or not you use the door for, if you use the door for balance, or how you walk to the back of the car, how you refuse to perform these tasks. What I would tell you at the end of the day, you can refuse to perform these roadside tasks, and absolutely, if you have doubt as to whether or not you're over the legal limit, or you're even going to have problems completing these tasks, don't do them. There's nothing that says you have to complete those tasks. Well, the officer, I'm sorry for interrupting, Jeff. The officer made the decision as to whether or not he was going to arrest you pretty much the minute he walked up to your car and made contact with you. Everything else that's done afterwards is just him putting evidence in the bank to use at a later court hearing.
Doug, what would you say? You have an experience 5 years as a state prosecutor. What about that experience helps you be a more effective criminal defense attorney?
It's the equivalent of going to war with a general who previously fought for the other side. That's really the best way to describe it. I know their tactics. I know how they put their cases together. I also know the pressures they're under from their supervisors and from everyone above, that it gives me a better chance to walk in there and actually know what I'm negotiating for. It's also the equivalent of, I also know what they're willing to surrender for. I know what they're willing to settle the case for. So because of that, I'm not walking in there asking for something so ridiculous that when you're like buying a house, the sellers walk away. We know what the going rate is for these cases. We know what a good resolution is. We know what a horrible resolution is, and we know when to walk away and set a case for trial. And I can give you an example. Just last week, we set a case for trial. We were walking into court, and just when we walked into court, they then told us, okay, we're going to give you a chance for your client to resolve the case for exactly what we were looking for a year and a half before. And it wasn't because it was because the jury was on their way up and they were outside, and they finally said, "You were really ready to take this to trial, weren't you?" I said, "Yes." And that's when they offered us the deal. So you have to have a little bit of that street cred to you to be able to do that and walk that walk.
I would expect nothing less, Doug. Let me ask you this. You know, somebody who has immigration status issues, how does just the mere fact of being picked up, how can that affect their immigration status?
Well, I can tell you that immigration now is more aggressive than ever, and I don't need to tell you that, Jeff.
Sure.
And there's a lot of people who, once they're booked into the county jail and a determination of probable causes is made on their case, that ICE has been coming in and actually doing deportation proceedings and taking people out of the jail and bringing them down to Chrome. So the best thing I can tell you is look, if you do have concerns with immigration, even I am so concerned about these things that when you bring them up to your attorney, your criminal defense attorney really should be someone who also reaches out and talks to your immigration attorney. And I can tell you, I won't touch an immigration case if my life depended on it, but I know there's a lot of lawyers out there that also do immigrations, that are also criminal defense attorneys. And there's friends of mine. But what I've also said is look, I don't think it's always the best when your criminal attorney is also your immigration attorney. I always like having that second set of eyes to be able to look at something, to say, listen, I don't have a dog in resolving it this way. I want to see if we could resolve it that way. It's nice having a second set of eyes. A lot of time money doesn't allow that to happen, but that's one of the things that I think is very important that I would always advocate. And one of the things that I think you appreciate, Jeff, being an expert in your field and very good at what you do, is when it comes to attorneys, okay, you either pay now or you pay later. And I'm not just talking about money, but if you sit there and let money be the motivating factor for the attorney that you choose, you're going to wind up being disappointed by the results, because when it comes to what you're paying for, definitely go with quality, because not all lawyers are created equal.
No, they're not. Let me ask you this, and I'm sure that this is something that you get a lot. Representing people accused of crimes, I'm sure you get. How do you represent these people who are guilty? I'm sure that people throw that at you all the time. How do you explain what it is you do and what it is you provide for people that are accused of crimes?
So let me be a little hokey for 3 seconds, okay? A little flag waving, and here's the way it works. So the rights that we have that are prescribed for in our Constitution, everyone always says, you're hiding behind the Bill of Rights, you're hiding behind the Constitution. These are the very same rights that are the foundation of our system of government. These are the same rights that our soldiers are fighting overseas to protect. These rights that are in our Constitution, they're not for people like me. They're not for people like you. They're not for most of the people that we have out there in the United States who are citizens who are not charged with a crime. These rights that are in the Constitution are for people who, for lack of a better word, are the child rapists, the kidnappers, the murderers, the people that we would say, Jeff, why do we need a hearing on this? Let's just take them, throw them away into the jails, and never think about them again. But the problem is, if we start doing that for the rapists and the murderers and the child abusers, then we start saying, well, if we're doing it for them, why don't we do it for the thieves? And then if we start doing it for the thieves, why don't we do it for the drug addicts who are almost thieves? And then we start doing it for the DUIs, and then the rights start getting eroded. So one of the things that I say is, listen, I don't look at it as necessarily of me representing the people. What I'm doing is I'm representing the system and making sure the system continues to work. And that's the most important thing. We are defenders of the system. We are making sure that these people who we would consider the deplorables of society, not me, but other people would consider the deplorables of society, are treated with the very same rights that were guaranteed to them back when the Constitution was still enabled. Now, to answer your other question, Jeff, for lack of a better word, how do I rectify in my brain representing these people? If I'm representing someone who I know has committed a crime, I sleep perfectly at night. The reason is because at the end of the day, what happens in our system of government is what's meant to happen. If they're found guilty and they do time, then you know what? That's a direct result of what the allegations are. If they walk, that's directly a representation of our Constitution and the system worked. If they're convicted or if they're found not guilty, either way the system worked. What really bothers me and what really keeps me up at night is when I represent someone who I know is innocent. Because those are the cases that really bother me to the point where I can't imagine anything worse than someone sitting in jail and doing time for something they didn't commit. And that's what gives me the most fear and anxiety when it comes to my job.
I've heard that from other criminal defense attorneys as well. The worst thing is when you're actually representing somebody who you know is perfectly innocent of the crime. It's,
now
understand
Jeff,
why.
You also raise an interesting issue, which I think is very funny, is I use the term innocent. I use the term innocent in that situation, but the law doesn't recognize guilt or innocence. The law recognizes guilty or not guilty. Why is this different? Because when it comes time to the system and looking at someone being brought up on charges, a lot of times when we watch the news, we watch people who are legitimately, they were where they were alleged to be. They may have even been engaged in that offense that they're alleging. But there's an age-old adage that we have, Jeff, and that is just because you did it doesn't mean you're guilty. You're only guilty if the government can prove you guilty beyond and to the exclusion of any and all reasonable doubt. And that is why when we look at things, they're like, well, he did something. Well, look, yeah, the jury's not called in to determine innocence. They're just called in to determine whether or not legally under the laws of the state of Florida, my client violated the statutes. So that's a big difference also.
Doug, can you tell us a story about situation where you defended somebody and they, it was a client who really needed a second chance and they made the most out of it?
Oh, wow. Yeah. So I can tell you, I've got this guy who actually came in and he was charged with his fourth DUI, his third and fourth DUI at the same time. And this guy was really, really down on his luck, hard on his luck, really couldn't even afford a lawyer. So when I got on the case, look, I took a little payment plan on him, whatever it was. And I said, listen, I'm going to help you. I'm going to go out of my way to help you. And one thing led to another. I wound up getting him into a treatment program. I wound up getting the cases resolved. Believe it or not, within a year, he was able to get his driver's license back, and he's been clean. Now, the way the joke is this happened back in 2011. I'm still getting $25 a month checks from this guy and still throwing them out there. But there's one other that comes to mind or two others, but the last one's a funny one. But I also represented this gentleman who September 12th of 2011 signed up for the military. And he went in and they made him a special forces and they made him a scout sniper. And he got a pressure cleaning job and he was cleaning the streets outside of the Atlantic Avenue bars. When someone came up and said, hey, you can't let your dog run all over. And he said, listen, it's 3:00 in the morning. My dog's going to run where my dog's going to run. And one thing led to another. And that guy wound up walking behind him and putting his hand on his shoulder. And my client's training took over and wound up taking him to the ground. And almost like Rambo, 5 other cops showed up and he wound up taking out the 5 other cops. It wasn't until they got involved and they looked into his wallet and searched him after subduing him that they found out that he was a retired vet. And we were able to actually get all the charges dropped against him, given the nature, and we got him VA services and got him on the right path. But it really was an amazing, amazing, amazing thing.
Wow. Yeah. It's something to be said about not just picking on somebody you don't know or anything like that. And that guy bit off a little more than he could chew, that's for sure.
Yes, sir.
Let me ask you this, Doug. I know you're very passionate about what you do. What drives you?
The fact that every day I wake up, I get to be a little bit of the underdog. I love that I get to come into the office and represent people where hours or days before they were in the county jail, sometimes for the first time. They come in, they look beaten and downtrodden. When I say beaten, I mean not by the cops, but I mean just very much at one of the lowest places you could possibly be. And me getting to look at them and say, look at my body language. Listen to the way I'm talking to you. Do I seem concerned? And they say, no, you look completely relaxed. And it's because I am. Because where you are is not someplace that 100 of my other clients haven't been. We go out of our way to deliver a concierge legal service to each and every one of our clients. The phones ring through to my cell phone after hours. We've got the app that gives you 24/7 access to all members of our firm. My staff is made up of law enforcement officers, or former law enforcement officers, former state attorneys, former employees of the state attorney's office. We literally took the best of the best and we brought them together. One last thing I could tell you, Jeff, is what makes our firm different is we don't sit there and assign the case to any one person, any one lawyer. We get together on a regular basis and we conference our cases almost like they do in the medical industry. I used to be young and arrogant enough to believe that I knew everything. Now, when I sit down with the other members of my staff, we sit there and we make sure that everyone knows what's going on, because it's possible one of my employees read an article just last week that applies to this issue, or one of my other attorneys could have had an experience when he was a prosecutor. So we really go out of our way to make sure that everyone knows everything about the case. So if I am in trial, or if I'm sick, or I'm on vacation, that one vacation I get to take a year, I guess, that there's no gap in coverage when it comes to these cases.
Well, Doug, this has been such a pleasure. I mean, from Northbrook to South Florida, here we are. I've literally known Doug my entire life, and back in the Chicago days, and this is just such an exciting thing to have you on here, to be doing this together and hearing you talk about how you do criminal defense law. And from the clients that I've had that have used you, I know that you really go to bat for people and you really are in their corner. And it's really just, it's wonderful to hear you talk about it.
So
you
Jeff,
want to give your number and your information again?
Of course, but I have two things.
I put your website on there, triallaw.com. Now,
two things, Jeff. Number one, when are you going to let me interview you? Because listen, I got to tell you, you are the mensch of all mensches.
Well, we'll have to schedule that, Doug. That would be a lot of fun. Although
okay.
I'd be a little bit afraid, but I would do it. I would submit to your questioning.
Well, like I said, I'll just send one of my lie detector guys over there to you, and we'll do it.
Oh, great.
And Jeff, I wanted to leave you with probably the greatest case that I've ever handled in my life. Okay? And here's the way we're going to do it, and then I'm going to end with my number. So I represented a guy who was charged with enjoying himself in a park. And I see the look on your face. It's fantastic. And he proceeded to do so by divesting himself of all of his clothing, when a young lady drives into the park and proceeds to see this occurring and photographs him doing this. So when he comes in and he hires me, I shake his hand, and then he proceeds to tell me why he's there, and I excuse myself and use a bottle of hand sanitizer later. I come back into the room and he signs up with me. So I proceed to go into court. And I talked to the prosecutor, and I said, so what are we going to do on this case? And the prosecutor says, well, I'm going to offer him 10 days in the county jail. I said, ooh, that's awfully stiff. See that look on his face? And then I said, so let me get this straight. You want to throw my client into a penal facility?
You want to what?
Throw my client into a penal facility.
Oh my God.
So, yeah, exactly. So she proceeds to tell me how much trouble my client is in and opens up the folder and shows me these color photographs of my client taken from all the way across the park.
Oh my God.
My response to the state was, I said, you know, it's very interesting that you're showing me these pictures because what you don't know is 2 seconds before your witness drove into the parking lot, my client was asleep underneath that tree right there in the picture. And he must have fallen asleep on top of an anthill because the minute he woke up, he was covered head to toe in ants and had no choice but to take off all of his clothes and brush these ants completely off his body, which clearly is what he was doing when this young lady pulled into the park.
Oh, well, it makes perfect sense.
Of course it does. Who wouldn't do this? So the state looks at me and said, Mr. Rudman, do you have a good faith basis for making that argument? Did that really happen? To which my response to her was, under our system of government, it doesn't matter if it really happened. It doesn't matter because you can't prove that didn't what happened or that's not what happened. And if you can't prove that's not what happened, it's called a reasonable hypothesis of innocence. And because of that, my client must go free. So we went from 10 days in jail to a $250 fine, and everything was completely wiped off his record.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I love your stories, Doug, over a beer or over a good piece of meat or anything like that.
Or a podcast.
Or a podcast. But, again, I can't thank you enough for coming on, especially knowing that you're going to trial tomorrow. I'm posting your website up again, flatriallaw.com. You want to give your phone number again?
561-444-4000. Operators are standing by.
Doug Rudman, thank you so much for being on with us. And we'll be doing our next show on March 21st. We're going to be having Andrea Jacobs from Coral Springs, who does.
Oh, she's good.
So you might want to listen in on that one.
She's good. That's going to be a good one.
Yes, she is. Doug, thanks a bunch. I'll talk to you later.
Thank you, Jeff.
Bye, everybody. Still there?